Welcome to another session of INF154. So in this video, we are going to continue with the previous session. So my PC decided to crash on the previous session, so I wasn't able to finish the whole recording. So this is the continuation of the previous session. If you didn't watch it, it's a prerequisite because we are just continuing from the previous session. So we saw that we wanted to create a code that will generate n random numbers uh, in a list box. So it receives a number, then it generates like that number of random numbers according to that previous video. So I said the pseudocode will start at 1, then as long as I is less or equals to n, we have to generate a random number between 0 and 100, add the random number to a list box, then just do the normal updating counter. So this is our process. This was supposed to be the process. So let me just divide that. So I'm going to just copy this, and I'm just going to be, because my PC crashed, it went back to that state. So here it was supposed to be getting inputs from the user and storing them inside variables. Then that's what I have. Then I'm just going to do it like this. Then now I can continue. So I'm going to go to the process. So we are going to follow the loop that I discussed, or the pseudocode that I discussed. So this is a loop based problem. So I'm going to use the for loop because that's the main focus. So for int I equals to 1, we are starting at 1. You can start at 0. Then we said as long as I is less or equals to what? N. We are just going to our update is just counting until n. So how do we do the inside? How do we generate a random number? Generate a random number, and store it in a variable. So to generate a random number, to store it, we know that we are going to have a variable random number equals to. Then how do we generate it? So we say the random object, we are going to use this random object dot next, because this is for integers. So I'm just assuming that it's just integers. For doubles, you are going to do it the separate way. So 0 to 101, because we want to include 100. Remember, this is the inclusive minimum, this is the exclusive maximum. So if you want 100, you have to add 1. If you want 50, you have to say 51. If you want 55, you have to say 56, and so on. Then after generating a random number, what do? We want to add that generated random number in a what? In a list box. So add the generated number in a list box. Then what are we going to do? How do we add numbers to a list box or items? We just say the name of the list box dot items dot add. Then we are going to do what? We are going to add the random number. We are not adding counter, but we are adding the generated random number. So this is what's going to happen. So let's execute the code and see what's going to happen. So it's still executing. Okay, so let's enter, for example, let's say 3. So it's supposed to generate 3 random numbers and add those random numbers in a what? In a list box. So let's analyze the code. So when we click submit, this event handler method will be called. So let me just do this, and let me say cmd then sub L main.cs, something like that. Then I'm just going to use, okay, what did I do wrong now? I hope this won't crash my PC again. Okay, let's say I opened the command prompt in the wrong directory in the quick access. So let me just say cmd sub main.cs. So yeah, now it seems fine. So now I can close this, I can close the command prompt. Okay, now let's see how the code is executed. Let me just do this and do this again. So when we click the button, it's going to generate, we are going to have random number, which is what? Which is 0 initially. Then we have our n, which we don't know. Then we have the random object. Then when we say n equals to convert to int32, then we are saying nud number dot value. It's going to take whatever we input here, which is 3, and it's going to be converted to int32 and stored where inside n. So our n will contain 3. Then it's going to go where? To the process. So when it gets to the process, initially our I is what? This initially, our I will start at 1. Then after doing that, it's going to go where? To the condition. The way we discussed, it's going to go to the condition. It's I, which is 1 less or equals to n, which is 3. Then yes, this is true. What are we going to do? We are going to generate a random number. So this is random, we cannot predict. So according to this, it generated 41. So after that, it generated 41. Then we add that 41 to the list box. So our list box, let's say this is the list box, will contain 49. Was it 49? 49 initially. 46, sorry, it's 46. Oh, yeah, 46. Then it's going to go where? After the last line of code, it's going to go to the update. So we are going to update our I to be what? To be 2. To be 2, yeah, from 1, I plus plus, from 1 to 2. Then we go back to where? To the condition we test. It's 2 less or equals to 3. Yes, 2 is less than equals to 3. So we have to execute the code inside the loop. So it's going to generate a random number and store it inside this variable. So in this case, it generated 51. So it's our random number will be 51. Then we add that 51 to the list box. So our list box will contain 51 on top of that 46. Then after the last line of code, we go where? We go to the update. So we increase I from 2 to what? To 3. So our I will be 3. Then where do we go? We go back to the condition. We check. It's 3I, which is less or equals to 3. Yes, 3 is less or equals to 3. What are we going to do? Execute the code inside. So we are going to generate a random number and store a random number and store it inside this variable. So in this case, it was what? 40. So it generated 40 and stored the 40. Then add that 40 inside what? Inside a list box. So our list box will be like this. Then it was 51, then 40. Then after that, where do we go? We go back to the update. So our I will be what? Our I will contain 4 because of the I plus plus. Then we check, is 4 less or equals to n, which is 3? No, so we stop the loop. So that's how you execute that specific code. Normally you won't know the exact values, but try to just guess like some random numbers and see how your code will function. But that's how you execute that code. Then from that you can tell that, yeah, my code is doing the correct thing without actually running the code, just by doing this, just by following this. Then now let's notice if you say, let's say now you say then you say generate, it's going to add on top of those ones, because every time you run the code, it's just going to get this lst numbers dot items dot add. So to prevent that from happening, firstly we have to clear the list box. So lst numbers dot items dot clear, like that. That's what we are supposed to do. So we clear the list box first, then we generate the random numbers, we add them to the list box. So now when we execute this, it's gonna clear the list box first, then do the normal process, the one we followed actually. Let's say 3 for example, or let me just say 3, submit. Now if I say submit, you see it removes, then it generates new numbers like that. So this is similar to what you did on your practical something. I think it's prac 6, something like that. So now let's move to the second sub problem. Remember we divided that problem into sub problems. So the next sub problem is to calculate the sum and the average. So we know to calculate the average we need the sum over the number of elements. So mathematically we have something like this, or with statistics, the number of elements. The sum, you calculate the sum first, then you calculate the average after. So you don't calculate the average inside a loop. Summation represents a loop. So given a list box of n numbers, how do we calculate the sum? So solution, so you have to think of a smaller list box. When you are dealing with loops, try to simplify the problem like into a smaller problem that you can like do manually, so that you can see if your code does the correct thing. So we know that with this loop, with this small list box, initially the sum will start where? The sum will start at 0. Initially we don't have any sum. Then we have to loop through the list box. So every time we check the current item, we add the current item to where? To our sum. So next iteration will be 0 plus 10. We want 0 plus 10. We are adding 10 to our sum. Our sum will be 10. Then we move forward. We want to add the current item. So we add 20 to our sum. Then we move forward. We want to add 30 to our sum. Our sum was 30. Then we are going to add 30 plus the current 30, which is 60. So that's how you simplify the problem. Now you translate that into code. This was not code, but you translate that into code. So with code, you are going to say, okay, let my average be 0, sum be 0, right? As long as we didn't reach the end of the list box, what do we have to do? We add the current item to the sum. That's what we were doing. We were adding the current item. As long as we didn't reach the end of the list box, we add the current item to the sum. We move forward, then we go back to the condition, sort of. So it forms a loop. Then after doing the whole loop, that's where we can calculate the average. So the average will be the sum over the size of the list box. So let's translate that into code. So we know that for that case, we are going to need an integer for the sum. Then I can say double for the average, because it makes sense for it to be a double, since it can have decimal. So equals to 0. Sum equals to 0, average equals to 0. Now we are translating that pseudocode. So we are adding that. So we know that after generating the random numbers, we can calculate the sum. Now we want a code that will calculate the sum in a list box. So this was a code for what? For adding n random numbers to a list box. Now, given a list box, how can we calculate the sum? So we are going to follow that process. Notice in terms of our counter will start from 0 because we want to access the current item. So our counter must start at 0, moves to 1 to 2 until it reaches less than items.count. So we know that that's how you loop. So in general, to loop through a list box, we just say for int I equals to 0. This I refers to the position or the index of the items in the list box. So you must start at 0. You can start at the last element and go to the first, but you can try that as an exercise. Then how do we move to the end of the, how do we say as long as we didn't reach the end of the list box? As long as we didn't reach the end of the list box, it's I less than whatever the name of the list box dot items dot count. So that's the meaning. So as long as our I is less than lst numbers dot items dot count. This line means as long as we didn't reach the end of the list box. Then how do we move forward? It's I plus plus. That's how you move forward in a list box. Then now the task, how do we just keep adding the sum? You say sum plus equals to. Plus equals to will add to the previous sum. But equals to will remove whatever you had and put whatever you are equating to. So how do we add the current item in the list box? So that's where we say lst numbers dot items then we put those square brackets accessing. Then our I, we know it will move at some point, it will be 0, at some point it will be 1, so it will just move through the list box. But on the right we have a what? A list box item, but on the left we have a what? An integer. So these are not of the same data type, so we have to convert this to what? To int 32, like that. Then we are done with the sum part. Then after calculating the whole sum, we can calculate the what? The average. So average is equals to sum divided by what? By the number of items in the list box. How can we get the number of items in the list box? So it's lst numbers dot items dot count. That's why I started with that list box. But if we consider these two, this is integer division, so it will always return an integer. So how can we prevent that? We can either convert one of these to double. So we can say, okay, let's, for example, if you choose sum, you can say double sum, whatever. But yeah, you can choose any so that it cannot be integer division. Or let me remove it. I'll demonstrate how it will work. Then now we want to add the sum to the rich text box. Our output will go to the rich text box. Let me see if I still have that problem that we had. So it was problem 7 from the loops. So it was this one. So we want to display the sum like this, average like this. So I can have a string for the output. It's not necessary, you can do it directly, but let's say I'm just have a string output. Normally I like to separate the output from the process. So initially I start with an empty string. So I want to say output. I'm sure you by now you should know this. Output equals to sum, then plus sum, then we want a new line, so new line, then we want the what? The average. So the average, after the new line we can just say output plus equals to, then we put the average, then we add that average, then we want a new line. By now you should know this. There's no need for me to explain in detail, but we will go through the process. So let's see how it works. And I think I might need a calculator. Let me check the calculator. Oh, it's already here. So for simplicity, I'm just going to choose 3 random numbers. You can extend it, or yeah, 3. I don't want to like execute a long code. So this is our list box for, and nothing changed here because we didn't touch the rich text box. So yes, let's see. So now for the output, yes, we calculated output as a string, but we didn't touch the rich text box. Dot text equals to output. That's why it didn't change. Remember, you only change something when you have equals to. If you don't have equals to, you cannot change something. Or yeah, you cannot. So let's see what's going to happen now. So now I'm just going to pick 3 for simplicity. So you see now I have something. Let's see how it works, or how it was calculated. So I'm just going to open that the thing again. I'm opening on the wrong directory, so I'm just going to go to downloads. Then here it is. We want to see how the code is going to be executed. So we are given this rich text box. We know how this will be generated. We want to see how the sum will be calculated. So what do we have initially? That's the most important thing. Initially we have our sum, which is 0. Then we have our average, which is 0. Then I'm going to skip the random part. So initially we have this I, which starts at 0. So our I starts at what? At 0. So this represents our counter. Then after this, we go to this. It's I less than lst numbers.items.count. It's I less than the size of the list box. The size of the list box, we have 3 items. So it's I, which is 0, less than 3. Yes, this is the question. Yes. So what are we going to do? We are going to execute the code inside. The code inside says sum plus equals to. So sum will be sum, which is 0 initially, plus what? Plus, convert to integer to lst numbers dot items at I. At 0, what do we have? At position 0, we have 8. So 8 will be added to the sum. So our sum will be what? Will be 8. Then where do we go after this line of code? We go to the update. So our I will be what? Our I will be increased by 1. So it will be that. Then where do we go? We go back to the condition. So we check, is that 1 less than the size of the list box? Yes. What do? We execute the code inside. The code inside says sum equals to plus equals to. So in the previous sum it's 8 plus the current element in the list box, or the item at position I, which is 1. So at position 1, 0, 1, we have 2. So we are going to add 2 to the sum, which is equals to 10. Then what are we going to do? After that we are going back to the update. So we are going to update I will be 2. So after that we go back to the condition we test. It's 2 less than 3. Yes, 2 is less than 3. What are we going to do? We are going to execute the code inside. So we are adding the item at what? At position 2. So we check position 2, we have 62. So this um our our thing our um our sum will be the previous sum plus whatever is at position 2. So 0 1 2. So at position we have 62. So our sum will be what? 72. Then after that, what's going to happen? After that, what's going to happen? We go to the update. As long as we executed the code inside, we are going to go to the update. So our update will be I equals to 3. Then after update, where do we go? We go back to the condition. We check. It's 3 less than 3. Yes, 3 is less than 3. What are we going to do? We are going to, no, we are going to stop the loop. So we are going to continue with the rest of the code. So our average is equals to sum. Our sum is what? It's 72 divided by what? By lst numbers.items.count. So 72, the size of the list box is 3. So 72 over 3. I can just press that on the calculator, which is 24. So our average will be what? 24. Then what are we going to do? We are going to execute the next line. So our output will contain output. This will be the output. So it will be sum plus what's the value of sum? Sum it's 72. Then new line means move to the next line. Plus equals to wherever we ended, we are going to add that specific. So now we have average, then plus what? The average. So the average is 24. Then new line like that. Yes, we calculated the output, but we didn't touch the rich text box. So we execute this line 56. Our rich text box must contain whatever is on the output. So this is what we got. So this was correct. And notice that, let's say submit. If we add the sum of these, we have 69 plus 53 plus 53, which is 175. 175 divided by 3, we have what? 58.333. But the average is 58 because, as I said, this is integer division. You are dividing two integers. So with integer division, it's going to ignore the decimal part. To fix that, you just make one of your thing, numerator, denominator, a double. So you can just say double or convert to double, whatever. But now let's execute this. Oh, I didn't close this. So now let's execute this and see what's going to happen. Let me just choose 3 and see. You see, now I'm getting decimals where it's appropriate, but this is too much. I want to round this off. We know to round something off, we can just say put that inside math.round, then you put that whatever you want to round off, then comma, then you put the number of decimal places. For example, if you say 2, it's going to round off to 2 decimal places. Then let's execute this and see if that's the case. Then 3, submit. You see, now it's rounding. Now it's doing the correct thing. So yeah, even if I say 10 numbers, it doesn't matter because it's a loop. It's going to be executed 10 times if I say 10 numbers. But that's the idea. Now we can move to the next sub problem. So we are still doing the same problem, but we divided it into sub problems, not to confuse ourselves. So the next sub problem is to calculate the sum of odd and even numbers. So again, to do that, we have to think of a small list box. What will happen if I have this small list box? So we know that we have to loop through the entire list box. That's the same code in most cases. For int I equals to 0, I less than what count, I plus plus, whatever. But when we do it manually, we are going to start here. We check. So initially sum of odd will be 0 and sum of even will be what? Will be 0. So when we do it like manually, so we start at this, we check, is this even? No, it's yes, it's even. So we are going to add it to sum of even. Then we move again, is this even? No, this means we are going to add it on sum of odd. Then we move again, is this even? Yes, we are going to add it on sum. So it's just an if else sort of, as long as we didn't reach the end. Check, if the number is odd, we are going to add it to the sum of even numbers. If the number is if the number is even, you add it to the sum of even numbers. If the number is odd, like that, then you can convert that to a pseudocode. So you start, sum of odd starts at 0, sum of even will start at 0, then loop through the list box while you didn't reach the end. So while you are moving through the list box, you are check if the current item is even, you add that current item to sum of even. Otherwise, you add that current item to what? To sum odd. Move forward. Go to, this is the same thing. It doesn't change. So let's see. Now we are moving to that one of sum of even. So sum of even and sum of odd. So I can just zoom in. So again, on my variables, I'm going to need again integers for sum of even, sum of odd. So maybe sum of even equals to 0, and we are going to have sum of odd equals to 0, because initially we don't have there. So then how do we loop through a list box? We know how to do that by now. There's no need for me to explain. So we start at 0 because the positioning starts at 0. As long as we didn't reach the end, means as long as lst numbers dot count dot items dot count, it's less than. So this means as long as we didn't reach the end. So move forward means we increment. So while we are moving through the list box, we have to determine if the current item in the list box, how do we access the current item in a list box? So we use an if statement. If, then current item, it's lst numbers whatever dot items, then you put I, because I will move 0, 1, 2. It refers to the positioning of those items in the list box. That 0, item 0, items 1, it's going to be like that. Then, but this is so to determine if it's even or odd, you just say if it's even, modulus 2 is equals to 0. We'll see how it works. But this is what this is this is a list item. So you see here they say list box. So this uh list box object collection, so it's just an item. So you have to you are comparing it with an int. Modulus refers to integers, so you have to convert this to what? To int 32. You cannot just do that. You have to convert that to int32. Modulus only works on integers. So that was the list box item. Now it's converted to an integer. Now you can use the modulus. So if the leftover of this one divided by 2 is 0, then we know that the number is even. You all know that by now. Then what do we increase? We are going to increase sum of even numbers plus equals to. Then we are going to add what? How do we access that current item? Numbers dot items at I, but this is a list box item. This is an integer. Then we have to convert that to what? To int 32. Then we just close like that. Then the otherwise it's else. So if that's not true, this means the number was odd. So we just say sum of odd plus equals to, then convert to int 32. Then we are saying lst numbers dot items at I. Then we just put the semicolon. Then after we are done with all those things, what are we supposed to do? We are supposed to update the output to contain sum of odd and sum of even. I will get to the minimum and maximum. For now, we are not focusing on it. So to do that, we just say output plus equals to, then you say sum of, or wait, actually this code was supposed to calculate the number of odd numbers and the number of even numbers. So it's the same thing. The difference is that I just have to change those two variables. So I made a mistake. That was just a logical mistakes. So I can say number of even numbers and number of odd numbers. So that was just a slight error, but it's the same thing. But now instead of this, you are just increasing because you are counting them. So number of even plus plus, then number of odd plus plus. So that was a slight error. You are increasing by one. You are not calculating. You are actually not calculating the sum. You are just like counting. For example, let me see from that. So you start. So if this number is even, you increase number of even numbers by one. Then if this number is even or odd, you increase like the respective thing by one. So that was just as a logical error, but it will make sense as we execute it. So here I'm just going to say, okay, number of even numbers of even is what? Plus number of even. Then I need a what? A new line. Then output plus equals to number of odd. Then I'm just going to say number of odd like that, plus then a new line like that. Now the code should do what is expected. Let's see if that's the case. So let's add four numbers. It doesn't matter, but let's see, we have two even numbers, yes, two odd numbers. Let's change this. Now we have one even number from this 76 and three odd numbers. So it seems as if it does the work, but let's see how it works actually. So the main goal is to understand the execution. It's not to memorize code, but how does it work? That's the most important thing, because memorizing code is easy, but understanding how it works, it's not easy. So when we start at the top there, we have number of even. So initially number of even is 0. Number of odd is what? Is 0. Then we are going to I'm just going to skip those parts that we did. So we are just going to start here. So I starts where? I starts at 0. That's the initial execution. Then after this, where do we go? We check it's I less than the number of items. In this case, how many items do we have in the list box? We have 4 items. So this dot count will return 4. So is it less than 4? Yes, this is true. What are we going to do? We execute the code inside. Then we say convert to int32 lst numbers.items at position I. So at position 0, what do we have? We have 69. Then we ask ourselves, is 69 modulus 2 equals to 0? No. So what are we going to increment? This is false. So we are going to skip this. We are going to execute the else part. So number of odd will go to what? To 1, because we increased it. Then what are we going to do after the whole thing inside? We are going to go back to update. Now our I will be what? Our I will be 1. Then after this, we go where? We go to the condition. So we check it's 1 less than the number of items in the list box. Yes. What are we going to do? Execute the code inside. Inside we get an if statement. So convert to int32 lst numbers.items at position 1. So at position 1, what do we have? We have 76. So we check, is that 76 modulus 2 equals to 0? Yes, that's true. So this is true. We execute this. It's basic if statement. So number of even will be incremented. So number of even will be, it was 0 initially, now it becomes 1. Then where do we go after the whole thing? We go back to increment. So I will be updated to 2. Then we check, is 2 less than the number of items in the list box? Yes. Where do we go after that? We execute the code inside. Inside the for loop, we get an if statement. We have to make a decision. So convert to int32 lst numbers.items at position I. So at position I, what do we have? At position 2. So we have 0, 1, 2. So we have 13. So we check, is that 13 modulus 2 equals to 0? Absolutely not. So no. What are we supposed to do if that's the case? If that's the case, according to the if statement, we go to the else, we increase the number of odd. So number of odd, it was 1 currently, so it's going to, from this it was 1, so it's going to increase to what? To 2. Then where do we go after? We go to the update. Our I will become what? Our I will be 3, because we are increasing it by 1. Then we check, it's I less than the number of items. It's 3 less than the number of items in the list box. Yes. What are we going to do? Execute the code inside. Inside we get an if statement, convert to int32 whatever is at position 3. So at position 3, what do we have? 0, 1, 2, 3. So at position we have 19. So we are going to check 19 modulus 2 equals to 0. No, because it's 1. Then what are we going to do? We are going to increase odd by 1. So number of odd will go to what? To 3. Then after number of odd, on the output we are going to add. Output will contain like the above output plus this. So output is going to say number of even, then we add number of even, which was 1. The latest update was 1. So it's going to add 1, go to the next line, then it's going to say number of odd, then we just add number of odd. The latest update was 3, so it's going to be 1 and 3, and this is what we get for that. So that's how you are supposed to execute the code. I mean, we are not actually done. I made a mistake. You see, I executed based on my knowledge, but I was not done executing this. So I had to update my I to be 4 based on the code, not based on my knowledge. I have to update I to be 4. I only stop when what? So I check, is 4 less than 4? No. That's where I stop. I don't stop based on my knowledge. I stop based on the code I have. So that was a mistake. But at the end, you get that. Then now let's see the minimum and maximum. Then I think that's the last part, if I'm not mistaken. So now we have the other subproblem. Subproblem 4. So find max element in a list box. So again, you have to think of a smaller list box. How will you approach a smaller list box? So we know that looping through a list box, it's easy. You start at 0 until you reach what? Less than .items.count, whatever. Then manually you would say, you will assume that the first item is the maximum. So manually, so you assume that the first item is maximum. Then you start where? You start iterating from what? From 1. You start counting from 1 because you already assumed that this is the maximum. Even if you start at 0 again, it don't matter, but for efficiency, you start at 1. Then you compare this with your maximum. Is this greater than 10? No. So this means my maximum must be equals to this. Then your maximum will be 20. Now you compare 20 to the next one. Is this greater? Is this greater than 20? No. The maximum will remain 20 until you are done. At the end, your maximum will be 20. So let's see how it works. Pseudocode, assume the first item is the maximum. If you were doing the minimum, it was going to be the opposite of this. So you assume that the first item is the maximum. Then you start at position 1 and loop through the list box until you reach the end. Every iteration, if the current item is greater than max, update the max to be the current item. So let's see how it works in code. So now we are doing the maximum, maximum. So for maximum, the first thing that we need is actually the maximum. So I'm going to have an integer for the maximum. So initially, so here I'm just going to assume that the first item is the maximum. So how do we get the first item from a list box? lst numbers.items at 0. That's how you get the first item. I have an integer, I have a list box item, so I have to convert to what? To int 32, like that. So this is assume first item is max, like that. Then what am I going to do? I'm going to iterate through the list box. So I missed a semicolon. So I'm going to int I equals to 1. I must be less than lst. So it must be lst numbers.items.count. As long as I didn't reach the end, keep moving, like that. Then I'm going to have the code inside. So for every iteration, I check if the current item is greater than max. I only update the maximum if the current item that we have in the list box is greater than the max. So it will make sense when we execute. So we check if the current item, how do we check the current item? lst numbers.items, then we put the counter, whatever. Then it's greater than what? Than max. But this is a list box item, this is an integer, so I have to convert this to what? Convert to int 32. If it was double, convert to double, and so on, like that. Now I can have a code that goes. So if, only if the current item is greater than max, that's where we can assume that what? Max will be equals to the current item. So max will be equals to the current item. So I have an integer list box item. I have to convert to int 32. Then I have to close this. Then I'm done. There's no else because I only update the max if the current item is greater than max. Now I can update the output. So output plus equals to the max. Then we are going to say plus the max we have, then plus new line, whatever, like that. So let's see how this works. It will make more sense when we execute it. So let's say it was 4 items. Then we say submit. Let's see the maximum item. Manually we can see that 75 is the maximum item and we got it, right? So easy enough. So let's see how it works on code, or let's see how it works on execution. So I'm just going to open that thing, this one. Then we start. Where do we start? So initially our max, we had max there at the top. We didn't know what was the value. So when we start, our max equals to convert to int whatever is at index 0. So at index 0 we have 75. Actually, let me change this because this one won't be a good example. I want where the max is sort of in between, sort of. Okay, this one is a little bit better. Yeah, let's do this one. So initially at position 0 we have 16. So we have 16, we start 16, right? That's the initial. Then I equals to 1. Notice that we start where I equals to 1. Then we go to the condition, we check it's 1 less than the size of the list box. In this case we have 4 items. It's 1 less than 4. Yes, 1 is less than 4. What do? We execute the code inside. Inside we get an if statement. So we check whatever is at position I, whatever is at position 1. At position 1 we have what? We have 9. We check if it's greater than 9 than max. It's 9 greater than max. Our max is 16. No. So we are going to ignore this if statement code. So we go back to where? To the update. We are going to increase I to what? We are going to increase I by 1. So I will be 2. Then again we check it's 2 less than the size of the list box. Yes. Then we execute the code inside the loop, then convert to int32, whatever it's at position 2. At position 2, what do we have? 0, 1, 2. We have 87. Then we check that is 87. So is that 87 greater than the max? Our max was 16. So we check. Yes, this is the case. What are we going to do? We are going to update the max to be what? To be the current item, whatever it's at position 2, which is 87. So you see now max will be 87. It makes sense that we update only if the current item is greater than the max. Then after this we go to the update. So our I will be what? Our I will be equals to 3. So what are we going to do again? Our I is equals to 3. Now we are going to check it's 3 less than, according to the code, not according to my knowledge, according to the code, 3 less than the size of the list box. Yes, what are we going to do? Execute the code inside. The code inside says whatever it's at position 3, is it greater than max? So at position 3, 0, 1, 2, 3, we have 3. So we check, it's 3 greater than max. So what's the value of max? Max is 87. Then we check, no. So we ignore the if statement code. Then we go back to the update. So our I will be what? I will be 4. Then we check, it's 4 less than the number of items. It's 4 less than 4. No, 4 is not less than 4. So we do what? We stop the loop. Stop the loop. Then what do we execute? We execute output. So to the current output will contain max, then will contain what? What's the value of max? The latest update was 87. So it will just contain 87, which is what we have on the code. I hope you guys understand how to execute a loop, because it's very important. If you know how to execute the loop, then it's easy to determine what went wrong. So normally you just start with like a small number of items. If it works for small number of items, even if I put like 10 items or 12 items, whatever, it must work. Like it must work. In this case, the max was 99. So you see 99. So as an exercise, you will do the mean, then you are going to combine everything. So you are going to combine those sub-problems and convert them into one sub-problem. So you will see that there are most of the code will share one loop. So this loop will be on its own, this one of adding random numbers. Then these loops will be combined together. Then the loop for max and min will be combined together. So you must do that as an exercise. Then we'll see in the next video when we talk about timers, or timer as a repetition structure. So yeah, that's all.